Well, thank you for having me out here, and thank you for coming out here tonight. I spoke at one other place in Manhattan today, and this and the time in Manhattan were the first times that I have ever given a talk with PowerPoint, so I'll try not to blow anything up. They've shown me how to push the buttons, and it should move forward easily. This is my 7th book. And whenever I start a new book, it's usually from an idea. When I started thinking about this book, it was 2008, the year of the Beijing Summer Olympics and the presidential elections. And there was a lot of talk in the press and in the magazines and on TV about whether or not the United States was the most competitive culture on earth. I was fascinated by that, and I wondered about this 20th century's biggest race. And when I finally fixed on the Ortig Prize, I quickly discovered that the story was really about something else than competition. It turned into a story of celebrity, or this hero business, as Richard Byrd, one of the main rivals in the race, liked to call it. These days, celebrity and being number one go hand in hand, and so I found writing this book doubly fascinating. When I started to research this book, there's no way you can escape Lindbergh. But I really wanted to write about the losers. Everybody has always written about what became known as the Great Atlantic Derby from the victor's perspective, which is the way we do it in the United States. But they've forgotten all of the others. From September 1926 to June 1927, 16 aviators from the U.S., France, Norway, and Russia entered this race, and 6 of them died. That's not quite 50%. They were seeking a $25,000 prize offered by New York hotel owner Raymond Ortig for the first aviator to fly across the Atlantic nonstop from New York to Paris either way. He first offered the prize in 1919, and I'll tell you why he offered it. He got all excited about, he was a Frenchman, and he got romantically excited about the airplane. But the technology to make such a flight was not really available to flyers until 24, 25, 26, certainly 1927. What's even more interesting about this story is that after the official race ended, something even stranger and deadlier began. From June to December of that year, less experienced pilots tried to duplicate Lindbergh's feat, and all failed. They either crashed, or they didn't get off the ground, or they died. And during that 6-month period, 12 more pilots died in the attempt to cross the Atlantic, many of them women. More people than that died trying to cross other large bodies of water, but those who tried to cross the Atlantic, like I said, many of them were aviatrixes who were trying to prove that women were just as capable in the air as men. It made sense to me as I was writing this, and it makes just general sense that this would happen when and how it did. The technology for a long-distance flight, a 33-hour, 3,600-mile flight, had come about with the development of powerful new air-cooled engines. If you ever go into an area where there's a lot of crop dusters, you'll still see these engines around. They're the engines that look like octopi with all the arms radiating out from them. They're very powerful. And there was also a prevalent belief at the time that the airplane would make the world a better place, that a kind of winged utopia would evolve. The idea was that because continents would be more quickly linked, people would get to know each other, and therefore there would be an era of peace, no more war. There was also this belief that man would evolve in about 3,000 years, that cities would float in the air and man would live in the rarefied atmosphere. Disease would disappear from breathing in the rarefied atmosphere, that man would become more spiritual, and a new breed of Homo sapiens would evolve, which would be called altimen, altitude men. More than that, though, as I was researching the book, I began to see that the growth of America's celebrity culture, about which we're so inundated today, really started to take place during this time, and especially during this race. Once again, technology made this possible. In 1926, 1927, you had the establishment of two national radio networks, NBC and CBS. They had to fill the airwaves with information. You had an explosion of the print industry. There were more magazines than ever before. And you had movies, and in 1927, you had the talking movies. Lindbergh, in fact, one reason Lindbergh would become so well known was because he was the most filmed individual at that time. It was estimated that 7.43 million feet of celluloid was used on Lindbergh, which was 2 million feet more than the previously most filmed individual, who was the Prince of Wales. So people were fascinated by all of these flyers, but especially Lindbergh. The idea of celebrity as a person of importance was taking shape in our minds at this time. Walter Winchell, the great gossip columnist and broadcaster, understood instinctively that fame had become the heart of a daily conversation. He didn't really understand what the conversation was. It was a moral conversation, but it was an important conversation. It also seemed to be somehow therapeutic for the people who were conversing, though not necessarily for the subjects of the conversation. But no one really knew what the language was. No one really knew what the grammar was. No one really knew what the rules of the game were. And then in the mid-1920s, two events occurred that clarified the rules of celebrity for the writer and the broadcaster, and we can still see the patterns today in our celebrity-soaked environment. The first event occurred in 1925. There was this little unknown Kentucky spelunker by the name of Floyd Collins, who went down into a cave shaft in southeastern Kentucky and got stuck. And for the next 2 weeks, newspapers covered the attempts to try to save him. There were several wire agencies that flashed news of the rescue attempts all over the United States. There were newsreels about Floyd Collins. During intermissions in plays at Broadway, the management would give updates on what was going on with Floyd Collins. And basically, when journalists look back, they realized that what they had done was to grab a reader's interest and hold it over the course of a long, sustained tale. This was a story of life and death, and they could tell physically that people were interested, because during the 2 weeks that this occurred, at first there were hundreds of people lined along the road leading to where Sand Cave was, and then there were thousands, and then there were 10,000, and near the very end there were 50,000. So they knew something was going on. And later they understood that what they had done was to sustain this tale by creating a cast of characters, people that the reader seemed to know. They were often very simplified. They were to a certain extent they were stereotypical, but every time we wrote about these characters, we always reminded people about their basic tale. Okay, so I'll give you some examples. The characters in the Floyd Collins story First off, there was Floyd Collins. He was devout. He was an everyman. At first, he thought that his faith in God would get him out of the cave. Then when it became clear that